Welcome back to Unpacking History, the podcast where we delve into pivotal moments that have shaped nations. Today we're turning our attention to Pakistan and a truly transformative period, the 1974 parliamentary proceedings that led to the Second Amendment. Many call this a watershed moment, but what exactly happened behind those closed doors, and what were the accusations flying around?
It's a period of history that's often discussed but rarely understood in its full complexity.
So these weren't just straightforward legal debates, were they? It sounds like there was a lot more at play.
Absolutely. There was also a constant effort to prevent the witness, Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad, the then Khalifatul Masih III, from speaking freely or reading from written sources, often forcing him to answer with just yes or no.
That sounds less like a fair hearing and more like an inquisition. What kind of accusations were they leveling against the Ahmadiyya Muslim community during these sessions? I've heard some pretty wild claims.
Indeed, the proceedings were rife with what the sources describe as conspiracy theories, reflecting a collective psychology of the nation, one that was introverted, deeply suspicious, and paranoid. Let's start with a significant one: the allegations surrounding Pakistan's partition.
Ah, yes, the Gurdaspur issue. I recall hearing about that.
Precisely. One of the main accusations was that the Ahmadis conspired against Pakistan during partition, which allegedly led to Gurdaspur remaining in India, thereby giving India access to Kashmir. Mr. Yahya Bakhtiar focused heavily on this, despite the fact that Ahmadi efforts to help Pakistan gain Gurdaspur were clear. Interestingly, the 1954 Munir report noted that vile and unfounded charges have been leveled against the Ahmadis, that the district of Gurdaspur was assigned to India by the award of the Boundary Commission because of the attitude adopted by the Ahmadis and the arguments addressed by Chaudhry Zafrullah Khan. The report clarifies that the president of the court, who was a member of that commission, recorded gratitude to Sir Zafrullah Khan for his valiant fight for Gurdaspur. This context shows how an unfounded rumor from decades prior resurfaced as a fact in 1974.
So they were essentially blaming Ahmadis for the loss of territory at the very birth of the nation. That's quite a serious accusation to bring up. What about international connections? I've heard whispers of Israel ties.
You're right. The Israel connection was another prominent conspiracy theory. Mufti Mahmoud, a key figure in the anti-Ahmadiyya movement, dedicated a sizable portion of his speech to this, portraying Ahmadis as agents of Israel. This stemmed partly from the prevailing anti-Zionist sentiments following Arab nations' recent war with Israel. The only factual basis for this allegation was that a few hundred native Arab Ahmadis lived in Kababir, a town occupied by Israel in 1948, conveniently overlooking the hundreds of thousands of other Arab Muslims living there. Afzal Randhawa, a member of the National Assembly, even called for an investigation into secret funding Ahmadis received from Israel.
That's shocking. How did these outlandish claims gain traction in a parliamentary setting?
The narrative was further bolstered by an event that took place outside Pakistan. The Rabita-e-Alami Islami, an NGO sponsored by the House of Saud, passed a resolution a month after a conference declaring Ahmadis as non-Muslims and agents of Israel and international Zionism. The Pakistani official delegate reportedly signed this resolution. This international declaration likely provided a perceived legitimacy to the domestic accusations. The reality regarding the Ahmadiyya community's stance on the Palestinian cause, particularly through figures like Sir Zafrullah Khan, was quite the opposite. The Ahmadiyya community as a whole has always been critical of the State of Israel and its creation through violence and occupation. In fact, Sir Zafrullah Khan himself was hailed as the hero of the Arab cause when he defended the Arab nations in the United Nations against Israeli aggression. This stands in stark contrast to the claims made in the assembly about them being agents of Israel.
This brings us to the WikiLeaks cables. Do they offer any external perspective on the events of 1974?
They do. Declassified U.S. diplomatic cables provide an interesting insight into that period. They suggest that Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto maintained a neutral stance to avoid embarrassment on the humanitarian front, opting to hide behind the parliament to make his decisions. The cables also report the agitations as generally under control, unfortunately ignoring the true human cost of the violence. One cable reveals that the Jamaat-e-Islami leader Mian Tufel Muhammad sent a telegram to King Faisal of Saudi Arabia requesting his intervention and referencing the Rabita-e-Alami Islami Conference's decision to condemn Ahmadis as agents of Israel.
It sounds like the government was well aware of the nature of these agitations, even downplaying their severity internationally. What about the persistent claim of a British connection to the Ahmadiyya community?
This was another very common misconception amongst mainstream Muslims. Mufti Mahmood alleged that a British document from the 1860s suggested that Muslim unity could only be broken through an apostolic prophet, implying Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was part of a British conspiracy. He quoted Agha Shoresh Kashmiri's work, Ajami Israel, which was known for fabricated interviews. However, the sources contradict this, stating that if the British actively sponsored anyone, it was the Deoband and El Hadith leaders in India, as well as the Barelvi school of thought. Chaudhry Mumtaz Ahmad also repeated this British sponsorship narrative. This illustrates how historical narratives were twisted to fit a predetermined agenda. So even the British were dragged into this. Finally, there's the claim about Ahmadis holding influential positions in the military and civil services. How was that used during the proceedings? This was a significant point of contention. U.S. diplomatic cables noted that virtually all our contacts maintained that military and civil services are full of Ahmadis, though when pressed, only a recently retired Air Marshal Chaudhry was consistently named. One senior civil servant even identified an unnamed provincial secretary in Sindh as the senior-most Ahmadiyya. This fed into a long-standing demand for the removal of Ahmadis from key government and military positions.
So it was presented as a threat to national security, not just a religious issue.
Exactly. The Samdani Commission, which investigated the Rabwa incident, also allegedly concluded that the relationship between the Ahmadiyya religious leadership and prominent Ahmadis in sensitive posts was too close for comfort. This, if true, provided a seemingly objective justification for purging Ahmadis from influential roles, framing it as safeguarding national interests rather than religious discrimination. A poignant consequence of this was the resignation of Dr. Abdus Salam, Pakistan's only Nobel laureate, from his government advisory positions in protest against the constitutional amendment. This illustrates the real-world impact of these accusations and decisions.
It's quite appalling to hear the extent of these fabricated narratives and the way they were used to justify what was essentially a political move against a minority. The layers of conspiracy, the suppression of information, and the manipulation of public sentiment are truly disturbing.
Indeed, the 1974 proceedings represent a critical juncture where political expediency converged with religious demands, fundamentally altering Pakistan's constitutional framework and its approach to religious minorities. The lies, ignorance, and hatred of some members, as one source notes, were intentionally kept from the public, but they became part of the official record, now available for all to see and reflect upon. It serves as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between state authority, religious freedom, and the pervasive power of narratives, however unfounded they may be.
A very insightful, albeit sobering, look at a pivotal moment in Pakistan's history. Thank you for revealing the truth behind these complex stories.
My pleasure.